Good afternoon. Welcome to the Leafy Vegetable Crops Pest Update. My name is Grace Choto. I'm an AHDB Knowledge Exchange Manager, and I'm working in the backgrounds with Coral Russell, who somebody you knew. Coral Russell is now Mrs. Coral Clark of BGA Limited. She's a Crop Association executive. Most of you will know Coral. This really is a joint event. That's why you can see those three logos on there. So it is a joint event, and I'll explain why in the coming slides. So just to give you an update on where we are. Obviously, we are all aware of the hot and potatoes ballot turnout, and obviously, subsequently, horticulture and potatoes really are being wound down. So the AHDB board agreed on a program of managed wind down and transition of levy pay activities for 21-22. Funding will continue for current research programs to the end of the research contract. At the moment, we've got 42 research contracts which will end in March 2022, and then the following year it drops down to less than 20, and the later year really down to 10. So we are really winding down. AHDB horticulture events which had been planned for and which are not part of contractual obligations in continuing projects, these are being handed over to other parties such as BGA Limited. So really, I'm really grateful on behalf of AHDB and growers for BGA Limited to take on this event, because this is part of an event which was planned for, but which wasn't a part of a contractual kind of obligation. Staffing levels are being managed accordingly across the year, and I can confirm that because today I had my second, just before this meeting actually, my second out of 3 redundancy consultation meetings. So AHDB has listened to what growers have been saying. If you need more details on the wind down, you can find these on the AHDB website. And these presentations, Coral, hopefully you will put them in the chat and people can download them. So just a few housekeeping points. Please mute yourself. We'll try and mute you if you forget to mute yourself, only so we don't pick up background noise. If you've got questions, if you kind of go to, for me, it's at the bottom of my screen. There's a chat function, but it might be somewhere else on your screen. Please type your questions in as we go so that after the main presentation, we're not wasting time waiting for questions, because this is a timed event and will be done within an hour. So we are recording it just in case there are people who've registered and other people who might want to see this later. It will be on publicly available websites. For bases and roster points, Coral has applied for those. So please, send your details to her if you haven't already as part of your registrations. And if you're on Twitter, please tweet at British Growers. So in terms of questions, like I said, that literally says, there's Coral's email address if you don't have it, coral.clark@britishgrowers.org. So the program, initially, when we started talking about this program, it was just going to be like a flea beetle because of the rising importance of flea beetles. But as we sat with Rosemary Collier, who's our main speaker for this event, we discussed, obviously, then we're going to call it like beetle, fly, caterpillar event. And we kind of just thought in the end, let's just go with pest update. So that's what Rosemary will be talking about today. And she'll touch on management strategies for those. And as I said, please type in your questions, and at the end, we'll answer questions that are in the chat, but we can also draw you in to discuss. If we are not certain of the questions or we need a bit of wider discussion, please, you can unmute yourself and then you can ask the question, and then we'll round up and end. So just to introduce Rosemary, if you don't know her, there's a picture of her. I'm sure you do. She's the director of Warwick Crop Centre at the University of Warwick. Rosemary is an entomologist who has worked on horticultural pest insects for many, many years. Her main research interest is in the development and application of integrated pest management strategies. And she's particularly interested in using science to address horticultural industry problems. She runs the AHDB Pest Bulletin with Dawn Teverson at the AHDB. And, you know, I can not think of any better person to have been awarded this, but she got the Veitch Memorial Medal by the Horticultural Society for an outstanding contribution to the advancement and improvement of the science and practice of horticulture. So, you know, Rosemary, thank you very much. I also want to use this opportunity actually to publicly thank you, because I think, you know, horticulture is being wound down, and Rosemary has been helping us right from the start. When I first started, I went to Warwick Crop Center and she brought all the scientists to cover the projects they did and to introduce themselves. And not many people know this, but she's been a pillar even for us who've been supporting and working on behalf of the industry. So thank you, Rosemary, and over to you. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Many thanks, Grace. Thank you very much for your words. You make me shed a tear. And thank you, Coral and BGA too, for hosting the event, and thank you to everybody for joining us. So with luck, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you see it, Grace? Is it all right?
Yes, you just need to put it in slide mode.
Oh, yeah. Okay, right. So here we go. So Grace has recounted the story of this event. So it's now a leafy vegetable crops pest update, and obviously it covers several crops. So hopefully something will be relevant to you in what I say. So basically, it's a review of the pest year so far, and I think Coral's going to put up a question for you now, but I'm going to cover beetles, aphids, flies, and caterpillars. And so the question for you to answer is, what have been your most concerning pests? Beetles, aphids, flies, or caterpillars? And I think you can just do that through Zoom. Is that right, Coral?
Yes, they're voting now.
Brilliant. So we'll just wait for the result, and then, yeah, I think Coral will show it on the screen.
We'll just give everyone a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, sorry, to fill it in.
So this is all a bit experimental. But audience participation is good.
I think you've got most of the votes in now.
Brilliant.
I will stop the polling in a couple of seconds, just in case anyone else wants to get their vote in. Okie dokie.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So aphids are the winner, and the beetles, flies, and caterpillars are about even Stevens. So yeah, interesting. Quite interesting that nothing is a very clear winner. So thank you. Great. Thanks, Coral. Okay. So I'll carry on. So first of all, I'm going to talk about flea beetles, which is what we originally planned. And I'm going to start by talking about the Phyllotreata species, which are the species that are active probably from April onwards, depending on weather conditions. There are actually 8 species that feed on members of the cabbage family and associated weeds in the UK. And people tend to consider them together. So the older literature says that the period of greatest activity is from the 10th of April to the 20th of May. But at least at Wellesbourne, more recently, damage appears to have occurred over a much more extended period than this. And the older literature suggests that the flea beetle population in any field is a drifting one, and that different species dominate in different parts of the country. So we, you may get different species in different years and at different times. So just to sort of summarize the life cycle on the right, then actually they spend most of the year, apart from about 8 weeks, as adult beetles. So they hibernate during the winter in sheltered locations, in hedgerows and things like that. They become active again in the spring when temperatures rise, and they're active and feeding. And then they usually sort of mate and lay eggs, and then the larvae develop. The larvae feed on roots towards the end of May. And then a new generation of adults is produced, and they are also active and feed. And then when the autumn comes and the temperatures go down, then they hibernate. So there's actually only one generation produced each year, but the sort of the old generation and the new generation are both active in different periods. So at Wellesbourne, we have been monitoring insects here for a good number of years, well over 20 years. And one of the things that we count are flea beetles. We don't identify them to species, but again, we sort of lump them together. So I just, for this talk, summarise some of our data from the last few years. And I think this is sort of reflecting what I've just been talking about, which is the two periods in their life cycle when the adults are active. So it seems to me as if in 2019 on the right, then the beetles were most active, most abundant after they'd overwintered, and that lower numbers of new beetles appeared subsequently. You'll also see I put cabbage stem flea beetle on that graph as well. And there the adults appeared in August, and that coincides obviously when winter oilseed rape is sown, which is what is such a big issue in terms of cabbage stem flea beetle. And cabbage stem flea beetle, unlike the other flea beetles, it lays its eggs in the late summer, and that's what causes the problems on oilseed rape. And then if we look at the other two graphs, then in 2018 it looks as if the beetles of the new beetles that came out in the middle of the summer were the most abundant and active. And then in 2017 it looks as if both sets of beetles were relatively, well, similarly abundant and active. So it looks as if you can get different patterns in different years. So this year we have undertaken a Sector Plus trial at Wellesbourne on flea beetle control. We chose to grow pak choi as our target crop. That was sown in the greenhouse on the 24th of April and transplanted in the middle of May. And the trial, as with all our trials, has to be netted to keep out the pigeons. And you can see from the graph, so again, a graph of flea beetle counts from the yellow water traps, and you could see that there was hardly any activity during May, and that was probably because it was so cold. And then as soon as temperatures warmed up towards the end of the May, then the beetles appeared in large numbers. And as soon as they appeared, they started to feed on our pak choi crop. So we sprayed on 2 occasions. We weren't attempting to protect the crop in any way, but we sprayed on 2 occasions and then recorded what we found. So the first spray was on the 28th of May, and the plants were assessed on the 1st and 2nd of June. The grey bars are the numbers of holes per leaf, and just illustrates the fact that we didn't protect the whole crop because the beetles had started feeding before we actually applied the sprays as soon as they emerged. But we also counted the numbers of active beetles on each plant that we assessed, and you can see here I've ranked them in order of the number of beetles seen, that there appeared to be a trend in terms of the number of beetles, and hallmark appeared to be the most effective treatment in reducing beetle numbers. So we decided to spray again. The beetles were still very abundant in the crop, and this time Andy and Marion's in the photo on the right, they went back out into the crop relatively soon after spraying, and counted the active beetles on the plants. They also saw dead beetles as well, and you can see that relatively soon after spraying there was quite a pronounced treatment effect, with hallmark, spruce it and tracer being the most effective treatments. But when they revisited the trial 5 days later, the beetles more beetles had come in, and they'd also redistributed or distributed themselves fairly evenly across the plots. So this sort of illustrates the treatments that we were using. All of them were contact insecticides of relatively short persistence, and so they have an effect for a relatively short time. In a plot trial, that effect probably disappears quite quickly, because beetles can come in from outside and also can move between plots. But it demonstrates that the approved insecticides are effective. And the good news is that the hallmark was effective. So unlike cabbage stem flea beetle, there appears to be no evidence of, at least at Wellesbourne, of resistance to pyrethroids. Unfortunately, all of the novel products were less effective, and some of them were no different from the untreated control treatment. Probably the first one, AHDB 9943, was slightly different from the untreated control treatment. We also had a phytodrip treatment, which is on the right hand side, and that was not effective against flea beetles, although the same treatment we've shown has been pretty effective against aphids. So that's a sort of overview of the results anyway, and I'd appreciate comments, feedback in the chat later on. So obviously we're aware that cabbage stem flea beetle can also sometimes cause problem for horticultural crops, and so I was just asked to think about whether any of the work that, and there's a substantial amount of work being done on management of cabbage stem flea beetle in oilseed rape. So I was asked to consider whether any of that would be relevant to horticultural crops. And say there's been a lot of work. It's summarized here on the left in terms of the sort of components of a strategy that have been considered for different growth stages of the oilseed rape crop, and they've been rated using those coloured buttons. So the green ones indicate reliable control with possibly some further research. The yellow is moderate control with further research needed, and the red is control not proven and significant further research needed. So overall, I think you can say that the IPM strategy for cabbage stem flea beetle in oilseed rape is work in progress. I think probably just a few of those components would be relevant to horticultural crops. And obviously one of the components is novel insecticides and biopesticides, which would be extremely relevant to horticultural crops. And indeed, in the Sector Plus project trial, we were looking at a number of novel, mainly biopesticides, actually. So I think, yeah, I think they're doing a great job for cabbage stem flea beetle and oilseed rape, but I don't think there are many spin-offs for horticulture yet. So I'm now going to move on to aphids and just talk briefly about the suction trap captures, the this year, which give an idea of how many aphids are flying around and moving between crops. And I'm here comparing 2021 versus 2020 for Myzus, Persicki and Brevicorrhini. And the suction trap captures, and I think that's also borne out by the water trap captures from the AHDB network in potato crops, indicate that aphid pressure has been, at least from these two species, has been much lower. And Myzus in particular has been later in arriving this year than last year. I've also just put in a comparison for black bean aphid here, Aphis fabi, and although the timing seems to be similar between the 2 years, I think again the pressure is lower this year. Again, comments and feedback would be very welcome. I just thought I'd include these maps. I've been putting them in the pest bulletin, and they're the output of some work led by a team from the Met Office, who are looking at some of the data, particularly about climate change, etc., that they can generate, and looking at how they can use that information to help with pest management, and also help identify new pests which might threaten UK crops and also UK forests. And so they chose to work on Myzus persicki first because of the very big data set that Rothamsted have got, where there is an established relationship between winter temperatures and the time that the first Myzus persicki peach potato aphid fly each year. And they produced these two maps, again comparing 2020 and 21. And the maps indicated, these were predictions, that aphid activity, Myzus persicki activity, would start later in 2021, and indeed it did. But to me, the interesting thing is just looking at the, if you like, the distribution of, well, it's reflecting the distribution of temperatures across the UK, and gives an idea of the parts of the UK where you would expect the timing of aphid activity or Myzus persicki activity to be similar. So I think they're doing some really interesting things, and I'm hoping that they're going to help me a bit with diamondback moth in particular, to get a better understanding there of what goes on in terms of weather data. So I'm now going to move on to bean seed fly, which impacts a range of crops, including some leafy vegetables, and just talk a bit about a current PhD project. The PhD student is Becca McGowan in the picture here. She's based at Wellesbourne at Warwick Crop Centre, and she's co-funded by AHDB, Warwick and PGRO. And I'm sure, again, this year, as in previous years, we'll organise, probably close to Christmas, a more focused meeting on bean seed fly that anybody who wishes to can participate in, and hopefully British growers will advertise it for us. So Becca's asking a number of questions, and I haven't really got time to go into her results here, but I just thought I'd list them for information. So first of all, she's asking whether trapping information from sticky traps or water traps can be used to indicate periods of high risk from bean seed fly. And then following on from that, can historical information on bean seed fly activity be used to develop a day degree forecast? And she's developed a preliminary day degree forecast, which I put in the pest bulletin this year. Then we want to get a bit of better understanding of how bean seed fly spends the winter, and whether that can actually help with forecasting. So if you use a day degree forecast, when should you start accumulating day degrees? And then she also, and PGR are also independently looking at whether there are cultural management approaches for bean seed fly that might be feasible. One thing that I've been looking at in various ways is the use of remote traps to monitor various pests, and bean seed fly is one of these, and some growers are already using them themselves, and that's one of theirs on the left hand side in the image. And basically they're a camera powered by a solar cell that takes a picture of a sticky trap underneath the camera, sends it to a website, and then that allows me to look at the traps in different locations and try and identify the bean seed flies and mark them and count them. And there are a couple of traps funded by AHDB, and this is one that's based at Intercrop in their spinach crops, and it just shows you the marked flies. And I think it's a really good way of watching pests that where you need to know on a day-by-day basis what's going on. It can be quite challenging with something like bean seed fly, which is quite hard to identify, separate out from other flies, particularly when you can't sort of look at the legs and things like that. So it has to be a bit of a guesstimate, but it is useful for identifying, when large numbers come in. And then finally, for bean seed fly, I just wanted to mention some work that has been undertaken by the AHDB Strategic Centre. So grower-led work on onions and control of bean seed fly in onions. And this is because, as many of you I'm sure are aware, all the emus for the force seed treatment, which is really the most effective treatment for bean seed fly, expire at the end of this year. And if when force is re-registered, it's likely to be at a lower dose, so less than half of the current dose. So this trial was set up at 3M growers in Suffolk, and they used both natural and pelleted brown onion seed. They looked at the two rates of force, so the current one, the potential future rate, and an untreated control. Elsams applied the treatments, and it was a randomized replicated trial with 4 replicates, and it was drilled and assessed by Bruce Napier of NIAB, who kindly passed the information on. The data are currently being analysed, but Bruce sent me some preliminary information, which is just a sort of summary of plant counts in the different treatments. So I've graphed them here. So you can see from left to right, the natural seed at rates of 0, 13 and 29, and then pelleted seed at 0, 13 and 29. And then these are the different coloured bars of the different visits to undertake the counts. And so I think what you can see, and they're compared as a percentage of the full rate force treatment, the counts. So you can see that the lower rate force treatment doesn't sort of on average provide as effective control as the full rate force treatment, but it seems to work, and I'd say the data haven't been analysed, but it seems to be working a bit better in the pelleted seed than the natural seed, and I don't know whether that is significant or not, but anyway, some interesting preliminary information. The other fly that I just wanted to mention is Swede midge. And again, with AHDB funding, we've been running a Swede midge monitoring network. This is the 2nd year of the network, and AHDB funded the traps, which were then distributed to some very willing volunteers, to whom we're very grateful. and these are pheromone traps. And basically the Swede midges are extremely tiny, again, very hard to identify. So all of the trappers send the sticky inserts to me, and I look at them under a microscope and attempt to determine which species they are. So we've got traps from Scotland down to the south of England, at a range of sites, and until quite recently trap catches were very low. However, now at some of the sites in the Midlands and in the south of England, numbers of Swede midge have started to increase, and I've just sort of roughly plotted them in the graph on the right hand side. So most of the sites, so the sites in Lancashire, Lincolnshire, Scotland, have continued to have low counts, so counts of less than 3 midges per trap per week. So say it's only these two areas where the numbers have increased, but we got a bit of a fix on the time of activity last year, and I think we're getting even better information this year. So the idea is just to get a better understanding of Swede midge activity, distribution, and then to see there are some forecasts developed in other parts of the world. So if we get a good fix on the timing, then maybe we can see whether one of those forecasts might actually provide useful information. And in terms of management, Swede midge has been a huge issue in North America in probably the last couple of decades, and they've done a whole heap of work on it and its management. And I think truly to get effective control of Swede midge, it has to be an integrated strategy. So it's not possible to rely on insecticide applications alone. And a key feature has to be rotation. So the Swede midges can fly a certain distance, but it's important to rotate crops so that you don't get infestations building up year on year. So my last group of pests are the caterpillar pests, and I just wanted to mention the two species of migrant moth that we're following through the pest bulletin. And first of all, the silver Y moth, and I guess the most affected crop is lettuce. And most of the information that we have on the pest bulletin are citizen science counts. So that's from people who are interested in moths or wildlife more widely, who record what they see, either in social media. In the UK, there's a site called Atropos, which is particularly for people interested in moths, and then people also record stuff on Twitter. And then in the Netherlands and Belgium, there are some very good and sophisticated sites where people record sightings of all sorts of wildlife, including these two species of moth. So here you can see the citizen science counts for 2021 for silver Y moth, and I'm just comparing the UK with the Netherlands and Belgium. You can see that we got one large blip from the Atropos site, which was towards the end of June, and we've been getting blips picked up in Twitter mainly since then, and one quite recently. I think there's been an influx in the last few days of silver Y moth, and you can't sort of compare the numbers at all between countries or whatever, just because you don't know how many people are actually out there looking for moths and other things. But just to say that I think the pressure in the Netherlands and Belgium has been pretty high in the last few weeks, and I think probably that has also been reflected in moths in crops in eastern and sort of southern and eastern England. And again, feedback would be appreciated. And then on to diamondback moth. And again, here we have some citizen science counts. We got, again, what appeared to be an influx reported on Twitter towards the end of June, and June appears to be the month usually when diamondback moth comes in large numbers, if it's going to come in at all. That wasn't really reflected in pheromone trap captures in crops, and I'll show you that in a minute. Again, in Netherlands and Belgium, there was again a blip in the Netherlands, and yeah, they've been seeing reasonable numbers, but not vast numbers as they did in 2016. And I also thought I'd just compare the UK with the other 3 countries from which I collect information. So that's Norway, Sweden and Finland. And the reason for sort of comparing the UK with all these countries is that sometimes the moths arrive from the continent and originally probably from somewhere warmer further south, and where they come from depends on which way the wind's blowing and whether there's a large population of moths in those places. So in 2016, the diamondback moth invasion actually came from Norway because there was a large population there, and the wind blew in that direction. But in other years, they have come from Belgium and the Netherlands and possibly France as well. So yeah, it just depends. And I mentioned pheromone traps in crops. And again, there is a network of pheromone traps run by agronomists and growers, not such an extensive network as the Swedmidge network. And they have pheromone traps, conventional pheromone traps for diamondback moth, and they send in the counts, and I summarize them on the website and in the pest bulletin. And one of the reasons for doing that is that the Brassica Growers Association, AHDB, have in previous years been able to apply for and get an emergency approval for Benevia to use as an additional treatment for diamondback moth control. And part of that is that the numbers of moths captured in pheromone traps have to exceed a threshold of 25 moths per trap per week, and that's sort of the trigger for the emergency approval. And this approval actually wasn't obtained this year, and that is somehow, I think, quite fortunate that the numbers of moths captured in the pheromone traps have not exceeded that threshold so far. And I think it's unlikely, since we've now passed what I think is the key period, it's unlikely, I think, that they will. But again, feedback appreciated. So another question, just to keep you awake. So have caterpillars been a problem for you so far this year? We'll just give it a few minutes. Okay, Coral, is it working?
It is, yeah, we got 7% of the attendees have voted.
Brilliant.
I think it's similar numbers to last time, so we can close it shortly. That's 28 people have voted. I will close it now.
Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. So no is the winner. So yeah, which is yeah, I think is what I would, yeah, I would understand from the the trap data, the monitoring data. So yeah, thank you for taking part. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to say a bit about a European thematic network that Warwick are part of, and AHDB were also part of it, but sadly have had to withdraw because of the wind down. It's called Smart Protect. It's coordinated from Belgium, and basically what we're doing is we're looking to identify and assess smart approaches to IPM. So they could be things like the trap view trap, the camera traps that I've shown you. They could also be, as in this picture, drones that do various things, either spot things or distribute biological control agents, for example. So earlier on in the project, a few months ago, we conducted a survey across the partner countries, which was really to gain some understanding about what growers and agronomists and other people thought about smart methods of crop protection in vegetables. And I've just done a snapshot here. So one question was, how informed are you about using smart tools and methods for plant protection? And the greatest proportion of people said that they were only little informed. So there seemed, and this, remember, this is across all the partner countries, so over 50% of the respondents thought they had little information or knew little about smart tools and methods for plant protection. And then another question was, how important is it to use smart tools and methods for plant protection? And that was sort of the opposite in a way, in that over 50% of the respondents thought that it was very important to use smart tools. And then just the last question at the bottom, we asked what were the factors hindering the use of smart tools for plant protection. And there were a number of reasons, but the greatest response, or most people thought the reason was because I guess they didn't think they were effective, or they thought that the efficacy needed to be proven. So that's just a snapshot, but thank you to those who took part in the survey. And so we're now starting to look at some of these technologies, and we have had access to a number of trap view traps, and I think here, I can't remember, I've probably got 4 or 5 or 6 being delivered here. So if anybody's interested in hosting a trap view trap, either for diamondback moth or bean seed fly, then please get in touch with me by email. There's no cost, but obviously you need every so often to change the sticky inserts and the pheromone lures, and just check that it's in good working order. So as I say, if you're interested, please email me. So I think that's it. It's sort of been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'd just like to say thank you very much to my AHDB colleagues, to Grace and Dawn. And I know times are really challenging at the moment. And thank you for all you do. To Coral and the British Growers Association team for all their help and for running this webinar. To the funders who've supported the various bits of work I've been talking about, my colleagues at Wellesbourne who do a lot of the work, the insect trappers, so those who are part of the various networks, obviously the Rothamsted Insect Survey, and to you all for taking part and answering the questions. And yeah, happy to hear any feedback or questions. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Rosemary. We are bang on time. We haven't received a lot of questions. There's just There's just one so far, which is what are good resources to educate ourselves on smart IPM?
Right. Okay. That's a good question, and I think in the end it will be the website for this project. I mean, it's been challenging working on the project during COVID, because we were all hoping to go out to sort of industry events and meetings and talk to the companies who develop and supply the tools, which we haven't been able to do. So it's been through websites and email and occasional video calls. But yeah, we are amassing quite a lot of information on these smart tools. We're going to undertake some benchmarking, and then say the phase coming up now is for us all to start testing, evaluating some of the tools, and hopefully, as with the trap view traps, getting grower agronomist involvement in that, and all of that information will be fed back into the Smart Protect website.
Thank you, Rosemary. I think at this moment, if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. That should be fine. I've got my own question just to keep us going until we've got just 12 minutes, to be honest. In 2016, when we held that workshop on diamondback moth, we had a presentation, I think, from somebody who was like a magazine, I can't really remember, but they were talking about wind direction and how it influenced, obviously, the diamondback moth that ended up in the country, because people at that point thought maybe, you know, they were coming from the south, but actually they were coming from like Scandinavian tip, really. I was just wondering whether, you know, because just linking it to the Benevia trigger for emergency use, whether there is an opportunity, or whether it's possible at all, CRD might say no, of monitoring populations everywhere, you know, along surrounding the isle, as it were, so that if numbers there are greater than 25, because things are slow here, that could trigger like an application, you know, just you know, could you see that happening in the future? Obviously, we're not, you know, with Brexit and everything else, but certainly wind direction is you know, has greatest impact, and we you know, and that information, if there's a population there, surely, and it reaches, it overflows or goes above the threshold, I would want to know about it if I were a grower.
Yes. I think at the moment the citizen science information I think is useful, because it gives an early warning of an influx. Although obviously, if you're walking your crops and you get a huge influx of diamondback moth, it will be very obvious that they're there. So I think that's sort of the timeliness. I think at the moment, CRD wanted to work with a threshold, and that was we sort of worked out based on some previous work. But yeah, I mean, I sort of quite interested, which is why I'm interested in working with the Met Office people, is that I'm hoping at some point they might be able to, you know, help us understand actually where the moths come from before they get to Norway or Belgium and the Netherlands. Where are they building up in the large numbers that then they move to those countries and then moved to the UK as well. So yeah, that's my hope.
Still no questions. Another one from me then. You know, you mentioned that there was a phyto drip just on flea beetle. It seems the 3 approved products we have are working anyway, but you did mention a phyto drip product that didn't work, although you said it worked for aphids, and aphids were highlighted as one of the biggest, you know, when you did your little survey. Is this phyto drip product already available for aphid use?
No, but I think it is being considered. No, I mean, I don't know how far it's got along the tracks, but I think it has yeah, it has potential, but obviously it has to be coded at
Yes.
the moment. So
Okay. I think as we have no more questions, I'm just going to bring this to a close early on. Just to thank Rosemary again, Coral and the BJ Limited staff team who have made this event possible, and also to your delegates. For Basis and Rosso, if you need those, please send your name and details if you haven't already to Coral. If you've got any further questions and comments, please submit them to Coral. And as I said, this recording will be made available online. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Grace.